Hello children of Barbarous, and welcome to Drunken Gorilla Painting. First, let me just clarify that this is a follow-up to a video I posted previously, so you haven't already seen that, I'd recommend checking it out first, as a lot of the basis of the model I'm focusing on today is covered in that tutorial. That being said, a number of you asked me to cover some extra details that various Nurgle models are blessed with. These include faces in the armour, Death Guard plasma weapons, and something found in abundance, both on Death Guard and certain Japanese cartoons I won't go into: tentacles. With all that being said, grab your brushes, round up your paints, and watch out for Nurglings. Now let's get painting. Once the armour has been painted, as per the previous video, we're going to look in particular at the faces pushing their way out of the armour. Using Death Guard green, we're going to layer the protruding detail, focusing on the areas that have pushed furthest from the surface of the plate. The next step is only ready for bone or horn growths pushing directly out of the armour, without any kind of recess or hard distinction. We're simply going to do a few glazes of Death Guard green, watered down and glazed on to achieve a smoother transition. This is to help blend the bone more naturally into the green of the armour. Back to the face, and we want to put in some shadow, and to do this we're going to do another glaze, this time with doombull brown, dragging this into the deeper areas, like under the eyes and under the cheeks and temples. It's now the same method as before, but using rhinox hide, and leaving this in the places of deepest shadow. Remember, with glazing, you don't want very much paint at all on the brush, and you want to make sure the brush leaves the model where you want the colour to be the strongest, as this is where most of the pigment will be left. Next up is highlighting, using a mix of Death Guard green and ushabti bone. We're going to add successively more ushabti as we go, but start with a mix of 2:1 Death Guard to ushabti. This is going on the sharper lines and points of the face. Bumping up to a 1:1 Death Guard green and ushabti bone mix, leaving thinner lines on our highlights, building up to the points we really want to accentuate, like the cheekbones, eyelids, and forehead. The final mix is the inverse of the first, flipping it, using 1:2 Death Guard to ushabti, with only the very extremes receiving attention in this step. Now, to finish the faces, we put on a dot highlight of pure ushabti bone on places like the tip of the cheekbones and the sharpest corners as the face pushes its way out from the armour. The rest of the face was finished by painting the eye, first with black, then picking out 3 dots, one at each corner, and then one really small dot at the very centre. These dots were picked out in white. The teeth were painted in the same manner as the horns and bone growths from the previous video. Next, it's onto the tentacles. The tentacles were base coated, first in rakarth flesh, and then with pallid wych flesh. It's important to get a solid coat on this, as most of the following steps are washes and glazes. Once the base coats have dried, if you want some of the tentacles to be slightly pinker going forward, you can hit them with a glaze of screamer pink. Once any tentacles picked out with this glaze have dried, we're going to start by washing all the tentacles with Reikland Fleshshade. Whilst this isn't diluted, make sure not to put this on too thick and keep an eye out for pooling on the model as it dries. The next few steps are all about glazing, and the first colour for this is a mix of carroburg crimson and lahmian medium, about 1 part carroburg to 3 parts lahmian medium, with just a touch of screamer pink added. We're going to use this to start to blend towards the end of the tentacles. As you can see in the footage, you don't just have to apply this at the tips of the tentacles. It can be good to pull the colour towards the root of the tentacles as well. Put it anywhere you're going to want to start to see a colour shift. We're going to use this glaze about 3 times, but it's all preference as to how strong you want the colour to be. No matter how many coats you go for, make sure that the previous layer is completely dry before applying the next glaze. The next step is very similar to the one previously, but the mix is now a glaze of 1 to 3 druchii violet and lahmian medium. This is applied in the same manner as before, but even further along the gradient, at the point where you want the colour to be approaching its darkest. Once again, I applied 3 successive glazes of this. One final optional glaze here, with a mix of 1 part Genestealer purple, 1 part Screamer pink, and 4 parts lahmian medium, only using this on areas you want to be the absolute darkest, such as the very tips of the tentacles. Onto the highlights now, starting with Reikland Flesh, watered down just a touch to help it flow onto the model. We're using this to pick out the curves on the tentacles, any lumps and bumps, really anywhere on the flesh that seems to have an edge to it. We then finish the tentacles with a very fine highlight of pallid wych flesh in the same areas as before, but, as always, picking out just a little less each time. With that, the tentacles are done for the moment. We're now looking at the plasma gun. Make sure that any area of the plasma coil is base coated in a solid coat of rhinox hide. The raised areas of the coils were then layered with khorne red. This step is a lot easier if you use a small brush and run its side along the detail, not unlike when edge highlighting. Make sure all of the plasma coil is picked out using this method. Next, we move on to Troll Slayer Orange. Using the same method as before, pick out the raised areas again, but less this time, working higher up the coils, leaving the red showing further down. The highest points of the plasma coils receive a small highlight of Tau light ochre. The plasma effect is then finished with dots of pallid wych flesh along its length. You can also see on the finished model that I attempted some object source lighting on the length of the weapon casing. This is completely optional, but if you want to try and emulate this, this was done with successive glazes of khorne red and Troll Slayer orange, culminating in an edge highlight along the edge of the weapon casing closer to the plasma in khorne red. The model is essentially done, but some final notes are that as the model is now going to be coated in Winsor & Newton matte varnish. After this has dried, I'll be picking out the tentacles and the eye on the face and the armour with gloss varnish to give them a wet sheen. I'll also be picking out any scratches on the metalwork over the model. I know we didn't cover any metal in this video, but I realised in the previous tutorial that the scratches lose a lot of their punch when hit with a matte varnish, so it's often best to do this chipping after the varnish has been applied. This chipping is applied with Stormhost Silver. After this, and on to basing, the model is done. This marine is now even better equipped to give generously gifts of pestilence, plague, and now plasma. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and you might notice I was trying a few new things, notably the camera and its placement. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on these shorter format tutorials. If you loved it, or hated it, please let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching till the end, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.